day, everything changed. In the quiet cul-de-sac of Maple Ridge, where the houses all looked the same and the lawns were measured with ruler-like precision, the Jenkins family lived a peaceful, simple life. Robert Jenkins had retired after 35 years as a local mail carrier, and his wife, Marlene, spent her days tending to her rose bushes and reading on the porch. Life in Maple Ridge had always been predictable. That is, until the new HOA board decided to modernize security. They hired a small, privately owned firm led by a man named Trent Holbrook, a self-proclaimed former Marine with a swaggering attitude and a habit of treating every resident like a potential criminal. He wore mirrored sunglasses, carried himself like he was guarding a presidential compound, and had a handgun holstered on his hip at all times. Most of the older residents found it unsettling, but few dared to complain. The HOA claimed it was all for safety. Robert had learned to ignore the new policies, until the day his daughter, Emily, came home. Emily rarely visited since her job with the Bureau kept her moving across states. She had built a career in tactical operations, leading field teams, conducting high-risk raids, and training officers in de-escalation tactics. To her parents, she was still their little girl, even though she was now one of the youngest FBI tactical commanders in the region. When she called to say she was visiting for a week, Robert and Marlene couldn't have been happier. That morning was calm. The sun was bright, the air smelled of freshly cut grass, and Robert was setting up the grill in the backyard when everything changed. Emily pulled into the neighborhood in her SUV, dressed casually, windows down, music low. As she turned toward her parents' street, the new security guard, Trent, stepped out of his patrol car, signaling her to stop. She slowed down, thinking it was just a checkpoint. But the moment she rolled her window down, Trent's tone shifted from official to aggressive. He demanded to know why she was there, accusing her of speeding through a residential zone and trespassing. Emily calmly explained she was visiting her parents, but Trent wasn't listening. His eyes narrowed when he saw her holstered service weapon under her jacket, completely legal, properly secured. Instead of handling it professionally, Trent reached for his own gun. Robert heard the shouting before he saw it. He rushed to the front yard, just in time to see Trent pointing his firearm at his daughter, yelling for her to get out of the vehicle. His heart nearly stopped. Emily had one hand raised, her voice calm and commanding. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, frozen by the sight of an armed confrontation on their quiet street. It took seconds, but those seconds stretched like hours. Robert shouted, pleading with Trent to stop. But he didn't. His finger hovered near the trigger, his stance shaking, not from control, but fear. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Emily slowly stepped out, keeping her badge visible, speaking clearly. Trent didn't see it, or didn't want to. The tension was unbearable until another guard came running from down the street, recognizing her credentials. Only then did Trent lower his weapon, his face pale with the realization of what he'd just done. Robert rushed to Emily, his heart pounding. The neighborhood was silent except for the sound of one woman crying behind a window. Later that evening, HOA President Cheryl Danner came to the Jenkins door, offering a stiff apology and claiming it was a misunderstanding. Robert could barely contain his anger. His daughter could have been shot right in front of his home. But Emily, with her calm professionalism, simply said, "I'll handle it." And Robert knew she meant it. That night, while Maple Ridge went to sleep, Emily sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, reviewing security policies, contacting her bureau liaison, and preparing a report. She wasn't angry, she was resolute. Her father had always believed in fairness, but Emily knew better. Fairness doesn't exist unless you fight for it. Because tomorrow morning, when the sun rose over Maple Ridge, she wouldn't just be Robert Jenkins' daughter anymore. She'd be the FBI tactical commander who came home to teach the HOA what real accountability looked like. The investigation begins. The next morning, Maple Ridge was unusually quiet. People who normally waved to Robert during his morning walk now looked away, whispering behind their coffee cups. News of the gun incident had already spread. But what the residents didn't know was that Emily Jenkins had stayed up most of the night gathering facts, making calls, and reviewing federal law. By sunrise, she had already spoken with the county sheriff's office, the private security licensing board, and a few contacts inside her own bureau division. What Trent Holbrook had done wasn't just reckless, it was criminal. Pointing a firearm at an unarmed civilian without immediate threat was considered aggravated assault. The fact that Emily was an FBI tactical commander made it worse for him, not better. When Robert came downstairs for breakfast, Emily was at the table, her laptop open, a calm focus in her eyes. He could see it, the same determination she had as a child whenever someone tried to bully her. But now, that fire came with authority. Within hours, she had compiled a full case file, Trent's security credentials, his company's hiring records, and the HOA's contract with them. Every line screamed negligence. The firm, Holbrook Protection Services, wasn't even fully licensed for armed patrol in residential areas. The HOA had hired them to intimidate trespassers after a few petty theft reports. It was power without oversight, something Emily had seen destroy communities before. By late morning, she visited the HOA office. It was a small building near the clubhouse with a glass door and a polished brass sign. Inside, she found HOA President Cheryl Danner and 2 other board members nervously shuffling papers. They already knew who she was. Her presence made the air heavy. Emily didn't raise her voice. She calmly introduced herself, explained that an armed guard had threatened her life, and that she was filing a report with both state authorities and federal oversight for misuse of armed force. Cheryl tried to excuse it as a misunderstanding, but Emily wasn't swayed. She requested all surveillance footage, copies of the security agreement, and Trent's employment records. When they hesitated, she reminded them that obstructing a federal inquiry could result in legal consequences. The room fell silent. They complied. By afternoon, the sheriff's department had arrived at the HOA office, following up on Emily's report. The sight of patrol cars outside shook the neighborhood. Trent was questioned, his weapon confiscated pending investigation. He tried to act composed, but everyone could see the fear behind his bravado. That evening, Robert stood on his porch, watching as neighbors gathered in small groups. They whispered about Emily, the daughter who had come home and turned the HOA upside down in a single day. Some were supportive, others skeptical, but all were watching. Meanwhile, Emily was far from done. She reached out to other residents and began hearing a pattern, stories of Trent harassing delivery drivers, tailing teenagers walking home, even shouting at elderly residents for crossing security zones. People had stayed silent out of fear of HOA retaliation. But Emily's presence gave them courage. They started to speak up, and soon the complaints piled up faster than the HOA could contain them. By the end of the second day, the sheriff's department had suspended Holbrook Protection Services license pending review. But Emily wasn't satisfied. She wanted the HOA to face accountability for hiring them in the first place. That's when she discovered something even darker. The HOA had ignored multiple warnings. The state had already cited Holbrook Protection Services twice for improper conduct and unlicensed armed employees. Yet, Cheryl and the board had renewed their contract because the company's owner, Trent himself, was Cheryl's nephew. That connection turned a simple neighborhood dispute into a web of corruption. Emily documented everything, compiling evidence into a detailed report. Her FBI instincts kicked in fully, clear, cold, and methodical. When she presented the findings to the county prosecutor's office, the reaction was immediate. The case was officially referred for criminal investigation, covering assault, negligence, and misuse of public HOA funds. By nightfall, Trent's car was gone from its usual patrol spot. Residents whispered that he'd skipped town. The HOA board scrambled to hold an emergency meeting, but Emily didn't attend. She didn't need to. Her work was already in motion. Inside her parents' house, the tension slowly eased. Marlene served tea, her hands still shaking from the previous day's fear, but pride glimmered in her eyes as she looked at her daughter. Robert, quiet as always, finally exhaled. Emily promised them it would all be over soon. But deep down, she knew there was one more step, the part where the truth came out for everyone to see. The HOA had silenced residents for years with fear, threats, and fines. But now, their authority was collapsing from the inside. And when the final meeting came, when the community learned who they'd really been living under, it wouldn't just be an embarrassment for the HOA, it would be their downfall. The fall of the HOA. The HOA emergency meeting was packed. Every resident showed up, whispering nervously as Cheryl and her remaining board members sat pale-faced at the front. Emily stood quietly near the back, watching. When the county investigator entered, the room fell silent. He read out the findings: unauthorized security hiring, misuse of HOA funds, and the assault report against Trent Holbrook. Gasps filled the hall. By the end of that week, Cheryl resigned, the HOA board dissolved, and Holbrook Protection Services lost its license permanently. Residents finally spoke freely, relieved to have their neighborhood back. Emily stayed only a few more days. When she left, the cul-de-sac was peaceful again. Her parents stood on the porch, proud and tearful. The roses swayed gently in the morning breeze, untouched, safe. For Robert, it was more than justice. It was a reminder that courage, discipline, and truth always outlast fear. And for Maple Ridge, it was the day they learned one quiet truth: never mistake calm for weakness.